a quote that I really like is, we encourage what we tolerate. So if your son talks back to you and you don't bring it up, you don't say anything about it, not only are you neutral on it, you're actually encouraging him to do it again. Or if he's disrespectful to his mother and you don't stand up for your wife, he's never gonna learn how a man stands up for the woman in his life and checks people when they need to be checked. You can do it politely, you can do it respectfully, but it still needs to be brought to attention. Yeah, so before we hit record, I told you to stop because we were having a conversation about Hickson Gracie. And I think as of the release of this podcast, this Ask Me Anything, my conversation with Hickson will come out next week. So a week from yesterday as of the release of this. But yeah, powerful conversation. You were saying something about being kind of that starting first family almost, if you will, of jiu-jitsu.
Totally. Yeah, when you... and it's kind of interesting because MMA has obviously gotten major popularity over the years, but anybody that is kind of old school, MMA, like before UFC was what it is today, and you start looking at pride fights and fight records in the MMA world, Hickson is the badass of all badasses. Yeah, and he doesn't get that credit, right? Because, well, Hickson was never in the UFC. Well, it's because the UFC was nothing when he was overseas in Japan, just destroying people.
Well, so, I think part of it was, you tell me if I'm wrong on this, but if I remember right, Hickson was actually going to fight in UFC 1, but the family decided to have Henner, his half or his stepbrother. Oh, excuse me, Royce. Yep. His half or his stepbrother, and the reason they chose him was because he was smaller and not as athletic as Hickson, because everybody expected Hickson to just dominate, and they wanted to show off the incredible power and effectiveness of jiu-jitsu. So they put the smaller, less athletic brother in there, and he still dominated people.
Yeah, in a non-weight class tournament style MMA. Yeah, they chose the guy that's 160 pounds wet instead of Hickson, which is Hickson's an athlete and he's a big guy. He's bigger, so absolutely.
Yeah.
So who does that, right? Like, that's so awesome.
Well, it's crazy too. I was watching it. Groin strikes were allowed in the early days. Like,
grab hair.
You could grab hair. You just couldn't eye gouge and you couldn't bite, I think, were the two rules. Other than that, everything goes. Yeah,
and was like no weight class. And then if you won, you're going around
You had to fight again.
Yeah. You're going 2-3 rounds. So you couldn't go all out, break a hand or get cut. Yeah, you're in for the long haul.
I kind of, in a way, wish that UFC still did that. I like the weight classes because I think fighters get better and more technical over time when you have those weight classes.
Yeah.
And it allows smaller guys to be able to be competitive. But I kind of like the bracket system and watching a fight maybe they take one weight class every month. And so this is the heavyweight UFC bracket that they go through. I like that. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah. Well, and there's an element that people like the bare-knuckle approach as well, because it is a little bit more realistic to fighting, right? Like, where you're not throwing heavy hands as much because you're going to break your hand, right? And so
they
it
actually
kind of changes
say that
things.
They actually say that bare knuckle fighting is actually, by the statistics, safer than wearing padded gloves, because you're protecting your hands when you're fighting and you're not just throwing these wild bombs that are giving people concussions and TBI.
Well, and there's an element of protecting the brain because the fight ends quicker too, right? Like, this is where boxing is actually more damaging to the brain because it's repetitive, constant hits versus you just get knocked out really quick, or we get a cut and the fight's over. So the fight kind of goes faster too. So it's interesting.
Wild stuff. Anyways, he's an incredible person. A lot of guys ask when I have people on the podcast, like, who stands out? He stands out to me as an imposing figure. And both the conversations I had with him were done virtually, but I could still sense a presence of confidence and just badassery that I just would not want to mess with the guy. And he was talking about getting in fights. He said, when I was fighting, there were no rules. Sometimes we fought on mats, sometimes we fought on the grass, sometimes I fought on concrete. And when you are fighting and there's no rules, you really have to protect yourself. But he said something interesting. I'm paraphrasing because I want people to listen to this, but he said something like, I was willing to die every time I fought because the mission of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and combatives is more important than my life.
Yeah.
And when he said it, he actually meant it.
Yeah.
It wasn't just hyperbole that you say as a bad A. Like, he actually believes that.
Yeah. And it's not a hobby, right? Like,
no, it's a lifestyle.
This is a lifestyle. And what's cool about it, like, obviously our typical jiu-jitsu practitioners today aren't at that level of commitment. However,
No.
I would argue that most have moved beyond this is a hobby. It's not a hobby for most of them. It is a lifestyle. Most, I think, if I had to guess, most guys that move on, because there's major dropout typically around blue belt, right?
Yeah.
But once guys get their purple, I don't think those guys ever. I would love to see the statistics of them stopping doing jiu-jitsu. I bet it's almost
it's significantly less.
I think they go until life is done, right? And I've gotten that question like, oh, Kipp, you're a black belt, so what's next? More jiu-jitsu. Oh, how long will you do it for? Until
Forever.
I can't or until I die, right? Like this isn't a, it's a fun hobby thing, right? It's like, no, this is the benefit, the mental, spiritual, physical benefit is integrated, right? Pedro Sauer always talks about when you get your purple. Like I remember, he's like, oh, you're about to get your purple, and he went like this, and I'm like,
in the blood or something.
Yeah, he's like, it's in the blood now. Like, it's done. You're addicted. It's it's part of who you are now. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, when we were he talked a lot about invisible jiu-jitsu because he's got Parkinson's now.
Yep.
So he's like, I wrapped up my entire identity in being a fighter, and now I can't fight physically, so I have to fight in a different way. And he talked about the power of invisible jiu-jitsu. I don't want to take too much away from the conversation because it was a good conversation. Cool. But this does lead me into something that I saw today, just to cover a headline real quick. This one was on Instagram, and it's from The Tin Men. And I don't know the guy's name, but The Tin Men. And he has some really good information on manliness, but it's well-versed and well-researched. And he's kind of bringing to attention the meme that men would rather fill in the blank than go to therapy. And it's really interesting because we see that as a meme, and we all kind of laugh at it a little bit. Oh, men would literally rather choke each other with, pajamas than go to therapy. Men would literally, drive across the country to like pretend sword fight against other people than go to therapy. A man would literally pull an engine out of a truck and rebuild it and break it down and try to figure out how to work and make it go faster than go to therapy.
Yeah.
And it's poking fun at our lack of desire to go to traditional modern day therapy, but I think it's really important that we don't discount the actual value that going to jiu-jitsu brings, or shooting, or painting, or hiking, or your hobby of choice. There's a lot of therapeutic properties in those endeavors, and it's hard because society generally, I think, and this is maybe more of the feminized version of society that we get, is that we started to believe somewhere along the way that in order for men to be healthy, they need to operate more like women. And women are very relational, so they'll be much more likely to sit down, face each other, talk about each other's issues, not really come up with necessarily any solutions, just bounce ideas back and forth and walk away completely uplifted, edified, and recharged. Whereas a man, for the most part, that sounds miserable to me.
Yeah.
I don't want to sit in a circle and talk about things without any direction or purpose or linear movement. I'm not interested in that.
You want to get things done as part of it.
Right. And so I think this maybe goes out to women and some men as well. Don't think that just because a man isn't doing it the way that you would do it, or doesn't communicate exactly the same way you do, or doesn't feel like his mental health is the same as yours, that it's wrong or it's not helpful. And a lot of guys actually think that too. So they'll say like, I'm not going to therapy. I need therapy. And then they'll go at life alone without any other men because they think they're supposed to go to therapy. And I'm not discounting some level of therapy for the right circumstance and situation, but I'm also making sure we give credit to rebuilding the engine with a buddy, going to jiu-jitsu with a friend, going and finding a shooting course to participate in, going on a hike and enjoying nature. If a man is willing to approach that from a therapeutic perspective. If you just go and you're not really deliberate about improvements and what its benefits are there for you, you'll still get something out of it just by default. But if you go with intentionality of, hey, I'm going to recharge, I'm going to be present in the moment, I'm going to release the endorphins, I'm going to sweat, and you have a clear purpose for why you're doing it, it can be a lot more therapeutic than just simply participating in activity or hobby.
Totally. Well, and this is why CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, has had a lot of traction over the years, because it moves to action, right? And it's not your traditional therapy where it's like, let's just express how you feel, and then you walk away going, so what do I do with all that, right? Like,
right.
How do I now apply that? And that's why there's some obvious traction around that approach of therapy, because I do think a lot of men seek what you're saying. It's like, okay, great, I understand that. Now what? Like, how do I put this to action and apply it to my life and progress?
And again, that's the distinction, I think, generally a distinction, not the, but a distinction between men and women. Whereas women think relationally, men think directionally. We're going forward, going back, moving side to side. We're always moving out somewhere against an enemy or towards a goal. And I'm not saying women don't have goals, but they tend to relate better to each other than men. The only time we really relate together really well is when we have a common objective or we have a common enemy. And then all of a sudden, men start communicating and working together. That's why at our events, and I think you know this, Kipp, we don't do when everybody comes to our event, we don't do this, put your name tag on and stand up and say your name and where you're from and all that bullshit. The very first thing that we do with our events is we issue them airsoft rifles. They're modeled after the AR-15 platform, same weight, same size, but they're airsoft guns. And we say, all right, you're on this team, you're on this team, you're on this team, and you're on this team.
Each other.
Go shoot each other. And it's amazing when you take a group of 4 guys or 5 guys on a team, how quickly they learn about each other. Who's the leader? Who's the communicator? Who's the guy hiding out in the back? Who's the guy who has the strategy? They start communicating and talking with each other. And then after it's over, they have this forge and this bond that makes the entire rest of the weekend go that much better, precisely because we didn't let them sit in a circle and tell each other about all their 3 greatest accomplishments and 3 things people don't know about you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so spot on. So spot on. Is that your headline?
That was my headline. It was really interesting.
Okay.
And it's a little bit of a mockery that people make. And I think it's funny. It is funny. There's some funny things, but there's actually a lot of truth to the things men will do over going to traditional therapy.
Yeah. And there's a reason for it.
Of course. It's therapeutic.
Yeah.
Feels good.
Absolutely. So the thing that come to mind for me this morning, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Brian, and we're talking about, rescuing and persecuting, right, from a leadership perspective, because I had a webinar yesterday and I was talking on the subject, and he was bringing up, this dichotomy in this space around his son wrestling, and he has a son that's been wrestling, going to practice, getting after it for, I think, like a couple years, and he hasn't won a match yet, right? And mom's like, maybe we should pull him out, right? He's not doing good at this, let's put him in a different sport. And he's like, no, like, look what this is doing. Look what he's learning, what it's forging, some grit, like he's dedication to something that he's still having a hard time with, right? Like all the value add, and he's seeing that kind of the value of letting him have some delayed gratification and grind and all that kind of stuff. And I couldn't help but think, the balance of this, right? Because from his son's perspective, you know, if I would guess if we talk to him, why do you go to practice? Why do you try to be good at wrestling? In his mind, it's what? It's to win in the next match.
Right.
And then once we get into something, we start realizing it's no longer about the match. Right? It's about my health. It's about something bigger than myself. And I was thinking this morning how unique that is, or not unique, but how almost that's a transcendent principle that we see even in the Iron Council. Guys come in and it's like, who's it about? It's about me. I need to be a better version of me. I'm going to lift weights so I look good and I feel confident. And then after they realize that it's not about the match, it's not about the tournament this weekend, they start going, whoa, wait a second. This is about something more. This is about how I show up in my home. This is how I show up as a man in my community with my spouse, how I show up as a father. And then it grows and builds upon that. But ironically enough, sometimes, and this is my point that I really came clear on this morning, is sometimes we'll jump past the tournament. We'll go, I'm going to take on the bigger thing when I haven't addressed the thing that I need to address with myself. And you know this, Ryan, part of our leadership development in the IC, our first pillar is lead by example. Part of that is that it addresses your effectiveness as a leader, but the other part is you need to get your shit together first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And once you get that, then it will open up and you will see the bigger opportunity of impact at a broader scale. But you will do it incorrectly and wrongly focused if you don't get your shit together first. And that was just kind of a thought that came out of that conversation. And I just see how that shows up in so many different elements of life, whether it be leadership in corporate America or in our homes or, even in our communities.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about an analogy. I've got my eye on this white new GMC. I think I told you about it a week or two ago. And it's still in the lot. I'm like, well, either they're asking too much or it's a lemon. I don't know what's going on. But like every time I drive by, I'm tempted to do this thing. And as I drive down the road leading up to this point, I don't see any white GMCs on the road. Like I haven't seen any. But now that I have my eye on a white GMC, I see them everywhere. I'm like, ooh, that one looks good. I don't like that style. Those rims, that lift, this, and this. I don't like. But they're everywhere. And the reason I bring that up is because when you're focused on the right problem, the solutions present themselves. They were always there. It's not like everybody just went out and bought a white GMC all of a sudden. It's that I can now recognize the GMC, just like a person who's in the right position or mindset can begin to recognize the opportunities that were always there, but he could never see it. Yeah. So that's why I really like. There is one thing, though, I take a little issue with, and I want to hear your opinion on this, because I think this is where the dichotomy comes in with this young man.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson talks about a study that they did with rats, and rats will play with each other. And they'll put a small rat in with a large rat, and there's actually a formula, and don't quote me because I don't know what it is right offhand, but the large rat needs to allow the small rat to win a certain percentage of time, or the small rat will continue and the large rat loses his playmate. So there's a line with doing the hard things and getting better and improving, but especially with a young man, of not being demoralized.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you address that. I don't know what that line is, but I thought about that with my own children. Yeah, I want him to do hard. Jocko actually talked about it. He used to make his son fight up. Yeah. And his son just got beat up and beat down.
Ruined it. Like he didn't want to do it anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is and it's funny coming from Jocko, because we think of this hardened bad A who's like, no, and he's like, in my age, here's what he said. I would have made it more fun for him. And fun is not a word I generally would associate with Jocko.
Yeah.
But that's what he was thinking, that he wished he would have done better. So I don't know what the answer is. But I see both sides of, okay, let's push hard. Let's, but also we need to collect some wins, because a win is in a tournament, for example, or a match. It's just the test. It's just there to show you how much you've developed and if you have what it takes. And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. It just means go back to the drawing board if you lose.
Well, and this is how I see it. The meaning and the perception that we have on what we experience absolutely matters. I've latched on to this quote by Andrew Huberman, and I find it fascinating. And it was really in this idea that growth mindset is great, but when you couple a growth mindset with stress, it literally allows your brain to rewire effectively and learn quicker. This is why when you do a jiu-jitsu tournament, guys will do them and they'll remember the jiu-jitsu tournament like it was in slow-mo. They remember every detail and they can't forget it. Like I remember almost every tournament like they were yesterday. They're ingrained in my mind. Why? Because my stress levels at the time were skyrocketed. And so I was super intense. And so I learned in a very intimate way during those tournaments. But here's the funny thing, and Andrew Huberman doesn't say this, but I was just thinking this in my mind. I'm like, that's interesting. Look at most defining moments in people's lives. They're the moments when you were 5 and you remember it like it was tomorrow. And in most defining moments, you saw the world one way, something occurred, and your paradigm shifted, and you saw the world differently. Now, is that positive for all of us? In fact, for a lot of us,
I mean, it could be traumatic or traumatizing.
Traumatic.
Sure.
Yeah. You may have realized that you're not worth it. You're not lovable. No matter what you do, you're not good enough. That may have been the message. And so stress coupled with the experience, was it heightened the brain to change? Absolutely. But did it change in the right way? Probably not. So the paradigm that we have around the stress, make sure that the wiring or the lesson learned is the correct lesson. And to your point, do I learn the right lesson? Do I learn that I'm never good enough, I'm demoralized, and I feel hopeless? Or is my lesson, I can do hard things and look at the fact that I keep showing up and I don't need to win, and I'm celebrating my grit or something else. And so how we see the circumstance absolutely matters.
Well, I think then that comes down to parenting and the dad and the mom helping frame the loss as something productive. I wouldn't say something to strive for. Of course we want to win. Yeah. There is this contingent of people who believe there's nobility in failure. There isn't. No. It's not noble to fail. It just means you failed and you need to do better. But it is a parent's job to make sure they're framing those losses in a way that serves the child the best. And this is one thing that's really important too. As a kid, you don't have the cognitive ability to make better stories.
Yeah.
They're very emotionally charged. They are what they are, quick to react, quick to jump to conclusions. But as an adult, you have not only an opportunity to change the story around your current circumstances, but you also have the opportunity to rewrite the story that you crafted over the past 43 years of your life, for example.
Which most of us are doing.
Yeah, but this is why I don't like when people say, well, my dad wasn't around when I was a kid, so therefore, and they'll say, therefore, life is hard, or I'm a dick, or I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how to do that. I'm like, you're a 40-year-old man. What? That happened 30 plus years ago.
Yeah.
Or, heaven forbid, and I'm in all seriousness, I'm saying that, you got abused or sexually molested as a child. I'm not discounting the traumatic experience that would be, but also you're 40 years old. I'm not saying to get over it. I'm saying craft a different story that's going to propel you to better results, not wallowing in your own self-pity that happened to you. You were victimized 40 years ago. Yeah. Make better stories for yourself and watch your life change, and those opportunities present themselves.
Yeah. And if we can't rewrite our own stories, trust me, we're not going to be in a position, back to kind of how this started, we're not going to be in a position to coach others on the meaning that they create.
How to do theirs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into some questions.
Yeah, so we're going to field questions from the IC. Jay Lowry is our first individual. How to teach stranger danger to a 5-year-old. My suggestion, tie him up, put a mask on, and, teach him a good lesson. Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually what came to mind too, because we talked about that. I think it was Tim Kennedy that had his daughter kidnapped or something. I think we talked about that a month or so ago.
And Tim Kennedy did that, and then we did a uprising once, and you had some guys teach us to escape handcuffs, and I remember going home, putting zip ties on my kids, trying to teach them, and my daughters were freaking out. They started crying, like, "What are we doing?" You know, I'm like, okay, that completely backfired. Yeah.
At least you're somewhat aware of it, that you could cut the ties quickly.
Yeah,
That's funny. 5 years old is a little young to understand a lot of the complex concepts that go into making sure that you're analyzing people's behavior and you're looking at who's safe and who isn't. But what I would try to do is I would role play some scenarios. Hey, if we're at the park and you can't find me or mom, what would you do? A 5-year-old can answer that question. Yeah. Now, they might not have a good answer for it, but they can certainly answer the question. Or if you're at the park and you say, hey, if you got lost and separated from me and mom, what person here in the park would you go to? And the answer is you go to the woman with kids. Like, that is the answer.
Yeah.
So if they give you a different answer, then that's an opportunity to say, well, can I share with you who I think it would be better to go to? You see that woman over there with the stroller and she has 3 kids? That's the woman you should go to.
Yeah. See the white van with no windows and the guy's giving out suckers? Not a good idea.
Don't go to that one. Yeah. But I think at 5 years old, you can start having some of the conversations. Or here's one that I've done in the past. Let's say you take, was it a daughter or a son? We don't know. 5-year-old?
We don't know. Yeah, just a 5-year-old.
Let's say you take, doesn't matter, your daughter or your son to the grocery store, and you are in the produce section, and you see a person who's maybe a little off. You don't feel totally comfortable around this person. You see this person, and you notice that your daughter sees the person as well. Mm-hmm. And so you might say, hey, good job for being aware of what's going on around us, and I see that you recognize that person. I'll talk to you later about that. And then you get to the front of the line at the cashier, and you talk with the woman there, and she's pleasant and lovely, and she's kind of like has this grandma energy about her. And you get into the car, and you're like, hey, who did you like that we interacted with? And she's going to say, oh, I like the lady at the cashier. Yeah, that's right. I did too. But why did you like her? Well, I don't know. She was kind, and she was nice, and she had a nice smile, and she was pleasant, whatever. I don't know if a 5-year-old's going to say that, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And say, well, who did you feel like maybe made you a little uncomfortable or made you kind of raise up your alarm, like made an alarm bell for you a little bit? It's like, that weird guy in the produce aisle. Okay, good. I thought that too. What made you think that?
He's acting weird. He was looking around weird. He seemed off. Yeah, like that's what your kids will say.
And so what you should do in that moment is say, that's exactly right. And we don't know why. Sometimes we can't really explain it. So we don't understand why. But we should always, always listen to our intuition. And this is not politically correct because everybody will say, well, that person could be blah, 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 blah. I don't give a shit what that person's excuse is. If they're being a weirdo or a creep around me or my kids, yeah, I'm going to profile. I'm going to make assumptions. I'm going to treat them differently than I would treat somebody I like. Of course I am. But we have this societal conditioning where we're supposed to be nice and friendly and treat everybody the same. That doesn't serve your kids, certainly. So I would just look for opportunities for awareness and then help your son or daughter verbalize and process why that person looks off, why that felt uncomfortable, in addition to the normal stuff, which is teaching your child about what parts of her body or his body are for them alone and not for anybody else. And, the traditional advice you'd hear.
Totally. It's unrelated, but I'm curious your thoughts on this, Ryan, because this has been really on my mind of late around having a secret word with my older kids. Because now we're not with each other. Obviously, at age 5, this isn't the case. Well, maybe, right? Maybe you get a phone call from the house from your 5-year-old, right? And he's scared. He's in a position where he feels like he can't say what he wants to say, or someone's impersonating your voice, right? With AI
stuff,
or your kids or vice versa. And so this has really been on my mind of late is what are the conversations that we have and what are these words where I can ask questions, and if they say that word, we got trouble. Have you got into this already?
I've talked a little bit about it with my older kids, but I definitely need to have more of those conversations because your job is partly to protect, and you can't do that if you don't know something's wrong. I mean, you could read cues if you're in person. You can read body language. You know your children well enough to do that, I would hope. Yeah. But like you said, they may not be there. I remember, what's that?
It may not even be them, right? Or they don't know that they're talking to you, right?
Yeah. Well, I remember, so my background when I was younger is retail clothing. I was in management with Journey Shoe Store and Buckle for a lot of years, and I really loved a lot of elements of it. At Buckle in particular, I was working with a lot of young, attractive ladies. That was kind of who we hired, right? It makes sense. And a lot of the times they were, either in college or later years in high school, and they'd have all these boys and men come in, and you could tell they're not really interested in shopping. They're interested in the girls. Yeah. And I talked with every one of our employees and said, hey, I'm here partly because I'm the manager of the store, but I'm also here to make sure you have a safe environment to work in.
It sounds like a part-time pimp almost there.
Yeah. Except for not. Well, I'm not even going to go there. So I said, look, if you ever feel like you need me to come say something, I won't make a scene initially. I'll do it very tactfully. And so I knew, because we had these conversations, when these young women were uncomfortable, they'd give me the nod or, whatever. And I would come up and I'd say, hey, Jessica, I need you to help with inventory in the back room. Yeah. And so she'd go do inventory. Yeah. And then I'd go back there. I'm like, hey, you good? She's like, thank you so much. So being aware of these things and having a response like you're talking about, I think is crucial, especially as a protector. That is one of our primary responsibilities as men.
All right, Greg Cleaver. I'm a firm believer that leadership is always best when you inspire buy-in over demanding compliance. I have a great thought around this. My focus has always been to create a space where those I lead are inspired to follow. The best course of action, I feel, is to take the lead moving the direction I want to go, taking a lead in action steps while communicating as clearly and effectively as I can. And yet, sometimes I fail to inspire movement. What would you recommend as an action step to gain compliance through respect, and how do you move forward with resistance or forward through resistance?
Well, I think I know the route you're going to take, so I won't steal your thunder on that. I'll leave that alone. But one thing I will say is I disagree a little bit with the premise of the question. In the very first part of the question, he said, as a leader, it's my job to lead people to follow me. I don't agree with that premise. I don't think that's your job. I think your job is not to build followers. Your job is to build leaders. So I'm a stubborn, hard-headed jackass sometimes. A lot of the time, actually.
And I'll confirm that for anyone. Yeah. For anyone's like, is that really true? I'm like, yeah, it is.
It is. 100%. And so let's say, Kipp, I'm working with you. Maybe I've got some good experience in the industry. I'm pretty well-versed. I'm pretty successful. But now I'm on your team. If you tell me to do something, even if I know it's right, I'll do the opposite. Even if I know you're right. Because I'm hard-headed and stubborn. Yep. And it has nothing to do with me not thinking you're right. It has nothing to do with me not being motivated or inspired. It has to do with my personality of I'd rather reinvent the wheel than do it your way, which is why I'm really not hireable. I have to work for myself for the rest of my life.
And I'll disagree with you in a minute around that.
Okay, you can. So instead, Kipp, you'd be better off in our relationship, in this example, to say, hey, Ryan, maybe we've had some butting of heads and things. I'm a good employee, but we butt heads a little bit because of this. And you come to me and you say, hey, Ryan, you know what? You've been doing this for a long time. You're really successful. You've got these great qualities. We're picking up a new project. And I want to ask if you'd be willing to head that project up. And I'm going to say, because I'm hard-headed, but I'm also ego-driven. Of course, I would love to do that. Say, great. Well, what I'd like to do is just give you some parameters to work in. I'd like to tell you what the goal of the project is, because that's the outcome. And I would like to turn it over to you, and you can tell me what resources you would need from me in order to achieve this objective within these parameters. How's that sound? I'm going to say, that sounds great. Okay, good. So on Wednesday afternoon, I'm going to give you the brief and everything and all the information you need. Wednesday afternoon, I expect for you to give me a proposal on how we're going to move forward with this. You put it together in these parameters, go. That's leadership. But I'm not following you. You're actually moving out of the way to allow me. And who am I going to be inspired by that? Of course. Not only am I ego driven, so I love the challenge and maybe even the accolades that come with it. I'm also being complimented because now I think Kipp trusts me. Kipp believes in me. And now our relationship is even better. Now, I would not do this if it was a life and death scenario or something potentially catastrophic with the business. Be aware of that. But that principle has really, really been helpful in my life.
So here's a quote. Employees should not be constrained by requirements, but driven by choice. And that's what this is. And I don't think you're not employable. I think that people people that want to manage you would never want to hire you.
That's probably true.
But if you're a good leader and you get that leadership isn't about managing behavior, but getting results and outcomes, you're a perfect employee. And this is the mood from the leadership focus of the tactical win, thinking that my role is to ensure successful projects and whatever, to the strategic of how do I support my people in doing those things and giving them the freedom and the agency to execute. And this is so foundational, man. Like we could put a religious spin on this and talk about this as a gospel principle, the importance of agency and freedom. Like most humans want to be impactful and be great at what they do.
Of course they do.
And they want to do it in the space of choice. And the minute you take away choice from me, then you're just acting upon me. And then here's the rub. We start not being innovative. I'm just a cog in this process. Anyone could do this job. I'm not even using my talents here. And now I start getting checked out. I'm not enjoying the job anymore. This is mundane stuff. I'm just being told what to do. And they don't hate it necessarily because of you. They hate it because there's a lack of fulfillment in what they're doing.
And autonomy.
Yeah. And these are foundational principles. This is dealing with humans. And we overlook this so much from a leadership perspective. So,
you know, one of the greatest compliments, I got a compliment about a month ago from somebody, maybe it's a little longer, but from somebody that I admire and respect. You know him, Wayne McPherson.
Yeah.
And the compliment he said to me is, he said, Ryan, I just want to thank you for believing in me to do this and letting me do it my way.
Yeah.
That was a compliment that he paid to me, and I paid him a compliment by letting him do it and letting him do it his way. This happened to be a role within the Iron Council. Wayne is one of our team liaisons, so he works with new members coming in, helps them find good and solid teams and good fits based on what they're looking for. And Wayne and I had been talking about this with you and other people for quite some time. And Wayne's ideas weren't completely aligned with mine, but they also weren't deal breakers. Yeah. They weren't things that I was like, we're not doing that. There are things that I'm like, I don't know if that'll work. I think this way is better. And he's like, no, I think this way is better. Well, I gave you the project. So if I had enough faith to give you the project, then I have to have faith that you can do it the right way. And here's what I told Wayne. Let's check it out. We'll do it till the end of the year. And we'll evaluate if that works or what we need to change or tweak or adjust. And whether he does it great or does it horribly, he'll do it great. It doesn't really matter because we can pivot and adjust, and it's not going to like ruin things.
Yeah.
It's just not really a hill to die on. And he feels empowered, and he should, because he's so amazing and so talented. And we're giving him a track to run on where he can actually create something that wouldn't be created if I was in the way bottlenecking the process.
Totally. Well, and when it's not ours, this is what will happen. So when it's on ours and we're acting out of requirement and compliance, right? So let's say it's not my baby, it's Ryan's baby, and I'm executing on Ryan's baby, but I'm not I don't feel a sense of ownership in it. The minute that there's a roadblock and it doesn't work, the average individual will throw their hands up. Well, I knew it. I wish you should have listened to me, and we won't drive it forward. But here's the funny part. If it was my idea, and let's assume my idea is subpar, it's not even as good as your idea. But when a roadblock gets hit, when it's my idea, guess what I do?
Yeah.
I double down and I make that shit work.
Yeah, for sure.
Because my commitment level to it being successful is way higher when it's mine. And so even a subpar plan will have more effectiveness when it's tied to someone's ownership versus someone else's. And that's just reality. And I have to agree with Wayne, man. Hopefully I've said this before and this isn't new, but like I've always been impressed with this.
Of course.
You do this so well.
Oh, I thought you meant impressed with Wayne. Sorry, I wasn't like, of course you're impressed with me. So sorry.
Yeah, it did sound bad. No, but you do this all the time. I remember when you have autonomy on battle teams, my natural instinct was like, no, we should they should all be the same. And you're like, no, I want to give them their freedom and autonomy to do things unique within their teams. And I'm like, part of me is like, that's a bad idea, because I wasn't seeing the leadership value, right, that you're bringing to the table. And I've always been impressed with this.
I appreciate it, man.
And so it's been a great model for me to follow, actually. So thank you.
Again, to go back to the dichotomy thing, it can be taken too far too. And I've done that where I've had teams that have frankly gone rogue and taken team members with them because they're doing their own thing. And so it's finding that balance. Yeah. I do want to say, Kipp, one thing you said, and I don't know if you said it, but you were talking about executing babies. And I just want to make sure.
Did I say that?
Yeah, you did. You said when it comes to executing your baby, that's what you said. I just want to make sure we don't say that in an election year when the abortion issue is so prevalent. Let's not talk about executing babies, okay?
Yeah, and please, someone do not soundbite that and make a video. Which I just probably asked someone to do.
Executing your babies, I'm like, Kipp. All right. What's next?
Well said, Mario Contreras. How do I know if I'm being too hard or too soft on my 12-year-old son? He is a bit disrespectful and has a shitty attitude in the morning and at times with his younger sister, and I know it needs to stop. I'm going to leave it as there. It kind of got lengthy, but that's the question.
There is a great verse, and somebody asked me like what book I'm reading in the Bible, and I'm not, which is why I'm going to really botch this. But I don't know the verse. It's a scriptural reference, but essentially it's by their fruits ye shall know thee. And what that means is that you can look at the results and ask yourself if the means are effective. So if you're maybe a little bit more lenient, a little more tolerant of certain behavior, and then you're noticing unproductive behavior like talking back, then something needs to change. A variable needs to change. If, on the other hand, you have a son or a daughter who's just by the books doing everything right, but you can tell there's no joy or no leniency or no fun in their life, then maybe you need to mix things up, and you can afford with that child to be a little bit more lenient or tolerant or understanding or compassionate. So I think the biggest thing here is to look at what the problems are, in this case, back talk, and then ask yourself what behavior from you and your wife is leading to allowing that to be okay. A quote that I really like is, we encourage what we tolerate. So if your son talks back to you and you don't bring it up, you don't say anything about it, not only are you neutral on it, you're actually encouraging him to do it again. Totally. Or if he's disrespectful to his mother and you don't stand up for your wife, he's never going to learn how a man stands up for the woman in his life and checks people when they need to be checked. You can do it politely, you can do it respectfully, but it still needs to be brought to attention. So without knowing all of the behavioral issues that might be taking place, I would lean more towards you can probably be a little bit more disciplined in the way that he communicates with others. That would be something I would certainly address.
And I didn't read this. Mario gave some context about, him being soft and a lot of that being due to how he was raised, right? And being probably, whooped quite a bit and kind of the pendulum, and he's swinging the pendulum a little bit too far, you know what I mean, on the soft. And not surprising, we all do this, right? Like we have a meaning from what our parents did, and then we almost go to the opposite direction to try to not do what they think, what we feel like they did wrong. And we lose sight of kind of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is in, what's the lesson being learned, not necessarily the nuance, right?
Yeah, and I think I may have seen this question. Is his wife asking him to be more disciplined?
Yeah.
Well, look, there's some dichotomy here, or maybe not dichotomy, but polarity in the sexes between masculine and feminine. Masculine is more authoritative. It's more directional, generally more disciplined. That would be when your masculine attributes are on display. Feminine attributes would be empathetic, nurturing, kind, compassionate, and men can be that too, and that's a more feminine type behavior, I would say. It's not bad or good, it just is. And we all have those characteristics to varying degrees. But I would say if your wife's bringing it up, not only does she think it's good for your son, she also needs it too. Yeah. Because look, if you're not doing it, Mario, is it?
Yeah.
If Mario's not doing it, guess who's doing it? She is. Yeah. Now you're asking her to be kind and empathetic and nurturing and loving and tolerant and all these things. And you're asking her to be directional, authoritative, disciplined. Is that the kind of wife that you want to be around? Is that the kind of woman you want? I would argue that most men would love a more tender side of a wife than the more authoritative side of a wife. But if you're vacating that responsibility, then she has to step up. And what ends up happening is she gets burned out. Or you feel henpecked. That might even be something that you feel like. You might say, God, I feel henpecked all the time. Right, because she's being the man because you're not. So if you're feeling henpecked, be a man. Be more authoritative. Be more disciplined. Be more directional so that she can let her walls down a little bit and she can relax and she can soften up. Like, have you ever seen a woman do that? Where she's just pissed and mad and just angry. And instead of being contentious, you're firm, but you're fair with her. And you can just see it. Her shoulders go down. Her face becomes more feminine even. Her demeanor is, I wouldn't say submissive, but it's certainly more
loving,
accepting, and allowable. What'd you say?
More loving.
Loving, open, receptive.
Yeah.
All because you showed up in a powerful way and she no longer felt like she didn't need to do that. So that's a side of the question you didn't ask, but a side that needed to be addressed.
Totally. And Mario, I understand, like, it's obvious what your concern is. Your concern is, I was raised a certain way and I don't want to come across that way. Right?
Of course.
And I believe this with every fiber of my body. You can be stern, you can lead, and you can establish boundaries with your kids and stop the disrespect and the shitty attitude while also ensuring that they know that they are loved. You can do it. Now, mark my word, the natural human tendency that you have to go, to spew off and just yell and, you know what I mean? Like, do the easy thing. That's not what I'm saying. It might require you to get on your knees, look at them in the eye, and talk with them and say, hey, this is unacceptable, and this is why it's unacceptable, and I'm not going to deal with this. Here's the consequences. I love you. I expect better of you, right? But there's natural consequences for this. You can do that without firing off, belittling the relationship, belittling them, and causing the negative effects of you just going and executing off of anger. You can actually be stern with them while also loving them and making sure that they know that they are loved.
It's actually pretty simple. There's only two things you need to be aware of when it comes to this. I was watching a video the other day, and a husband and a wife, I think it was actually just the husband, sat all of his kids down, and he recorded it, so it was there, said, hey, what's one thing that you don't like when daddy does? And I think he had 4 or 5 kids, and he did it independently. Every single one of them said, when you yell at us.
Yeah.
And so I asked my kids, my 4 kids, we don't like it when you yell at us.
Yeah. My kids.
And in my mind, I'm like, I don't yell.
I don't yell.
So there's only 2 rules. Number 1, don't raise your voice. Yeah. Because they pick up on that fast. And you might not think you're yelling, but even an elevated voice might sound like yelling to a 5-year-old. Yeah. So don't yell. And number 2, don't demean them through your emotions. Like give little snips at them, sarcastic responses, try to embarrass them in front of their friends or in front of their siblings. If you can just keep your cool about you and keep a level voice without resorting to little jabs and snips and comments and just be really level-headed, you're 99% of the way there.
Yeah. I have to say one more thing. One pulse check, and I love this, it comes from a book called The Anatomy of Peace, is do you have a heart at war towards them? If you do, guess what? You will yell. You'll do all those things. It'll show up. They'll sense it. So before you get into the position of discipline, I did this last night literally with my 13-year-old or my 11-year-old. She's going around. She's mad at mom. She's acting like a complete brat. Before I walked into that room to talk to her, to lay the groundwork of her attitude being unacceptable, I had to level set my mindset and say, she's amazing. I love her. And she's great. I just need to have a conversation with her. And then I had a conversation with her, right? And we were able to leave the room and have a better attitude. And by the time we were going to bed, it's almost like the problem never existed. But if I went in there yelling, thinking she's the problem, man, it would have never worked last night.
Jordan Peterson says something like this as one of his rules, and I can't remember which book, and I'm going to butcher the phrase itself, but it says something like, never allow your children to do something that would make you dislike them. Yeah. Because there's people we don't like, and it's behaviors, it's communication styles, it's whatever. Don't allow your kids to get away with things that make you dislike them. That ties into heart of war, because if you allow them to be a little jerk, and they are sometimes, then you're going to dislike them. And if you dislike them, you're certainly more likely to yell, to be frustrated, to come back with jabs and quips. But if you like them, in fact, if you love them, the loving thing to do is to check behavior. Yeah. It's not loving to allow children to do things that are going to hurt them, literally or figuratively. Yeah. But we do it all the time because we want to spare ourselves the feeling of discomfort, not our children.
Spot on. Last question. We'll let rapid fire this one because I got a jet in 3. Okay. Nathan Strubble, how do you reconcile the sovereignty of God with the sovereignty of man? I am on a quest to understand how God is ultimately in control, yet men also have agency on earth.
Yeah. Did you pronounce his name right? Because he gave us a pronunciation for it.
Oh, did he? Strubble.
I wanted to make sure we clarified.
Put that at the beginning, Nathan.
Put that at the beginning.
It's your fault.
Just put it in your name. Just like the proper enunciation in your name itself.
I have a better idea. Why don't you just spell your name correct?
All right. With that said,
Nathan Strubble. Here we go.
Yeah. Well, let me give you a more temporal answer to it. So, and I'll try to be quick. I know you got to get going, but so we've got this battle planner, right? And we've been talking about it for 9.5 years now. And this is a system that everybody uses. If guys come into the Iron Council, we teach the battle planning system. This is what we teach. And the guys who do a good job follow the system because it's proven to work. We've tested it with tens of thousands of men and it works. So if you follow this system, do you believe that I have limited your sovereignty because you're choosing to implement a system that you know works?
No, if I chose the system.
You chose to do it. Yeah. So now, okay, I'm not comparing myself to God or to religion by any means. So I'm just sharing that as an example. But now let's take it to the spiritual side of things. Yeah. If you're a Christian and you choose to follow God's word and his path because you know it's a doctrine, aka a system, that is going to serve you well in your life, are you limiting your own sovereignty because you're deliberately choosing to do something that you believe will work in your life? Of course not. Yeah. God's hand is in everything, and he has given us one of the greatest blessings, and that's our own agency, which also, for a lot of non-believers, is really hard to wrestle with because they'll ask, well, a just God wouldn't allow murder to take place or children to be kidnapped and raped or any number of things that happen that are horrific and horrible. That isn't true. A just God has given us our agency and allows us to make our decisions, which unfortunately sometimes means people are going to make bad decisions, but then it's our responsibility to put ourselves in positions that help protect and serve and help other people. So I've never looked at God's sovereignty and my agency at being at odds with each other. In fact, I believe they're complementary.
This is when people do, though. Well, I'm part of this church and I follow these rules. Stupid rules. I hate these rules. Did you? What are you doing? Like, more or less, I think it's when people have outsourced their religious beliefs or their testimonies into an organization and they've stopped, like, making a conscious choice that this is my decision. They're just going along to get along. Does that make sense? And we do this
just
politically.
Follow a new church.
Yeah, but it's, you got to own it. And the minute that we get into the mindset of waiting for someone else to do something, or we disagree and we're not addressing it, like, okay, well, I disagree with that, so what am I going to do about it? Then you have moved into the space of being a victim of something else. Said another way, you've given your sovereignty over to someone else. And that in itself is a choice. And we do this constantly because, I don't know, it's lazy. There's safety in it. We don't have to take responsibility for if it goes south. It's their fault, not mine. And this is about our mindset of how we see whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's our employment, whether it's a church that we belong to, or a political party. How do you feel about it? And what are you going to do about it? And is it aligned with you? And if it's not, what are you going to do? And we have to constantly have that mindset.
This is why skepticism is so important, not to be confused with pessimism.
Yeah.
It's okay to be a skeptic. You know, I see this in a lot of different church institutions where they'll say, ours is the right church, this is the only way, this is the way it has to be done. And then people, you might believe that, and that's okay, no problem if you believe that. But what is a problem is when you say, well, fine, you know, and you see things that you don't even agree with or like, and you're like, well, I guess this is the only way. That's where you've limited your sovereignty because you're no longer deciding for yourself. It's okay to be skeptical. If a church authority, a bishop or a pastor or a priest or whoever comes and says, hey, this is the new directive, you ought to question that. And then you ought to go to God, if you're a spiritual person, and ask him yourself.
Yep.
And then you can find the way and still make decisions. But I choose, to varying degrees of success, to follow a Christian doctrine because I believe it will serve me. And that's a choice that I'm making for myself.
Totally. Yeah. And this is the difference of people that are part of a religious church versus being religious. They haven't moved on to focus on what does this mean for them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Cool. Well, Kipp, I know you got to get going. I'm going to forego my ask today. I'd actually like to give it to you because I know you're doing a lot of like webinars and leadership development and courses and programs, and you're doing a great job on all that stuff. Everybody that's ever attended one of your workshops or done one of your webinars or been to one of your trainings, whether it's inside the Iron Council or out, has always just been blown away. So if you have somewhere guys can go, why don't you just share and let them know where to go? That way they can be in the loop on what you have going on.
No, man, I appreciate it. And full disclosure, you've created that opportunity for me a lot. And so thank you. That doesn't go without notice from me, the opportunity to do leadership development in the IC, and that has really allowed me to cut my teeth on working through stuff and
your
your guidance. So thank you. For me, I think it's connecting with me on Instagram, Kipp Sorensen, KippSorensen, or kippsorensen.com, same exact spelling. I've been trying to do a lot of leadership series every month. Those are free webinars where I'm doubling down on office conflict. And so yesterday we actually did an office conflict of a culture of blame versus a culture of accountability. And how do we move from a culture of blame to accountability? Next month we'll do something on how do I lead up the chain of command? I got a bad boss. I'm doing my part. How do I deal with that? Or how do I have difficult conversations? How do I hold someone accountable? Those kind of things. So appreciate it, Ryan.
Awesome. Well, you guys know where to go. Kipp, like I said, I love what you're doing. And for what it's worth, it sounds a little weird, but for what it's worth, I am proud of what you're doing as well. It's really exciting to see how that develops. Awesome. All right, guys. Thanks for the great questions today. We will be back Friday for our Friday Field Notes. Until then, go out there, take action, and become the man you are meant to be.